love
Hello.
this. This is so fun. I was just telling I'm like, who was I telling? So funny. Oh, it was a peer coach. I told her that I was starting these like YouTube chats, which kind of evolved from like an interest in building a YouTube channel, like slight interest. I don't know if it's gonna like it's I'm still interested, but I'm not like studying how to build a YouTube channel or anything. Um, but also I want to start having these broader reproductive health, well-being conversations. And my go-to is usually, I'll start another podcast. And I was like,
Oh,
hold up,
guilty.
Amanda.
Guilty.
You do not need to like go down an entire like just slow down and we'll start on YouTube. So
I love
um
it. No, don't just start another podcast. Go on a different platform that
yeah,
you know nothing about
exactly.
and just see what happens. I
Yeah,
love
see
it.
what happens, right? This is like my whole life is an experiment. I also am in this bit of a I'm trying to like think back to when I recognized it starting, but it was at, at least 12 years ago. Like every 3 years, I do this like sometimes gigantic pivot, sometimes subtle pivot. And I think I'm in that it just must be my cycle. I don't know what it is about 3 years, but I'm like,
I
okay, time for
wholeheartedly
something
feel
new.
that. Yeah. I think for me, it comes from this. Okay, well, I'm really good at helping this very specific population of people.
Yeah.
But then I talk to other people and I'm like, well, they need information too.
I
They
know.
need help too. So maybe I can help this new group of people.
Yeah. Well,
I
it's
get
funny
that.
because that we're recording this morning because the peer coach I was on with last night said I mentioned perimenopause and she was like, "What? Why don't you make your whole group about that?" And I was like, "Well, I don't want to switch niches. I just want to like widen the lens and connect people to other people who talk about perimenopause." So when I opened your Instagram this morning, I kind of forgot what we were going to talk about. So I just did a quick like open your Instagram. I was like, oh my gosh.
I don't know if we decided. I
I
think
don't
you were
think
just
we
like,
did.
your post resonated with me. Do you want to come and talk about uteruses and hormones and stuff? And I
I
was
don't
like, of
remember.
course I do.
I don't remember, but obviously we're supposed to be here. And then I was like, yeah, want to know about perimenopause? I've got people to connect you to.
So good.
So when I open your, wait, what's your podcast called? Like perimenopology or
Perimenopology. Yeah.
genius. I am okay. I've done all kinds of chit chattering so far because I'm super excited. Let me slow down, let you introduce yourself, and then I have a million questions about perimenopause because 43 and
Yeah.
I have so many questions about perimenopause. So I feel
So
like that's the
hopefully,
direction.
yeah, hopefully I'll have the answers that you're seeking, but it's good to talk about it. It's good to
Yeah.
flesh it out
Yeah.
because it's something that nobody talks about. I don't know if you learned about perimenopause in high school sex ed. I know that I didn't, but it's my opinion that we should be talking about it because it's kind of like this second puberty that we go through as
I
people
was
with
driving
uteruses.
last night. I'm like, wait a minute, is perimenopause like a really long PMS for menopause? Because that's what I feel like.
It can be. That's the thing. It's such a highly individual experience. But look at us getting into it right away. I'm going to like do the
I know.
thing where I
Okay, go
talk
ahead.
about who I am.
Say who you
Okay.
are.
Okay. So I'm Michelle Kapler, and I'm a registered acupuncturist and Chinese medicine practitioner. And I'm also a fellow of the Acupuncture and TCM Board of Reproductive Medicine, which is the governing body for reproductive health specialists in our field. And in my 12-year clinical practice, I've been exclusively practicing in the area of reproductive health and endocrinology. So I've spent my career in clinical practice helping people basically manage or treat or tend to or care for the reproductive health. And there's been a big spectrum in that practice, obviously. So a lot of my work has been fertility and reproductive medicine in that way. And then I'm coming to this place where I'm getting all of these people who are wanting to treat hot flashes and insomnia, vaginal dryness and low libido, and all these fun things that happen during this time. And then I'm also a coach for folks who are going through reproductive health challenges. And I approach my work and coaching through an intersectional feminist lens. And to give you an idea, again, of who I help, it tends to be people experiencing fertility challenges or who are going through the perimenopausal transition, both of which tend to be a big set of unexpected circumstances that can kind of invite people to question everything. So I help them
that right there
walk through that. Yeah. Yeah. And I suspect that your work takes people down that road too.
Well, yeah. Okay. I have so much to say. This same coach, I'm just going to keep talking about her. Last night, we were just hanging out on Zoom. She lives in New Zealand. So we were just chit chatting. And, I was trying to explain to her, like, well, when you go through any one reproductive, like, experience, because there's so many of them. I just shared a link in the Full Spectrum Space group yesterday because I got like a Facebook memory that last year, the same time of year, I had a DNC because I was having such heavy bleeding for so long. I was super anemic. And then I forgot, but I remembered in the Facebook post that, like, they took out these like pearly looking things that had to be biopsied. And I was like, huh, I don't feel like I have cancer, but maybe I do. Like, there's so many of these things. So I was trying to explain to this coach yesterday, when you go through any one thing, it kind of like stirs up the whole kit and caboodle of what it means to be a reproductive human, like a human with like uteruses and hormones and like whatever you decide to do with all those things, they're there and the impact is huge. And so I'm really wanting to like not niche in, but like scan out to, I forget how you worded it, but it was perfect. It's just like you go through that one thing and like all the other stuff bubbles up and you want to weave it all together. That's the space I'm trying to create.
No, I hear that. And I think the big thematic thing that keeps coming up for me is that the reality is that there's no one universal experience that everybody will have because human bodies are super weird. By the way, can I swear during this conversation or do you keep it?
Oh, of course. As
Okay,
I drink from my bad bitch mug that says, let's fucking go.
Just, just wanted to make sure. Human bodies do really fucking weird things, right? And they surprise us and they are really inconvenient. And that really bumps up against this idea that we have through diet culture and even medical research and just the way that we're socialized, especially those of us who are socialized as women, that we should be able to control our bodies through our actions and create very specific outcomes that don't result in us being too loud or too hormonal or too inconvenient. We're taking up too much space. But the thing is that when you live in a human body, they usually just don't cooperate with the way that you'd like them to. So there's a lot of really interesting opportunities for thought work and examining and questioning our beliefs and our relationship to our bodies through those experiences. And thankfully, unfortunately, it can come up time and time again. For some people who menstruate, it's every month where we have this opportunity to experience really inconvenient things with our bodies, whether that's pain that's so bad that you can't function, or PMS or PMDD that's so debilitating that you can't function or do your job, or it's affecting your relationships in your life. And, sometimes there are things that we can do to lessen the symptoms. Sometimes there are treatments that we can try. But sometimes, like in the context of perimenopause, it's actually a normal part of human physiology to have these body changes that happen. And so wrapping your mind around this idea of, okay, my body isn't doing this thing that society and culture and healthcare providers and influencers on Instagram are telling me that it shouldn't do. Like, I don't know, expand around the middle or have big emotions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or need to advocate for my own needs. Like, God forbid, I should need to take a
Right?
moment for myself. Like, that really bumps up against what we're
Yeah.
taught is supposed to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So many things to say. Um, I think too, when you look at like decades of reproductive experiences, there's so many layers of like shame and stigma and comparison. And like, why do I need a day off when I first get my period and other people just keep working through it? Or why, like, there's so many layers of it that get built up along the way. And if you sometimes, if you start like understanding those and noticing those and seeing the patterns, like, I want to use the word, the like term Pandora's box, but I feel like it's one of those terms I use all the time. What is it when you like look at one piece and then the whole thing opens up, or like the whole
I
thing?
would call it Pandora's box or opening a can of worms is
Totally.
what
There
I
you
would
go.
say.
That one I
Here's some really gross analogies for you.
yeah, and it's like well, we live in such a patriarchal culture that like we want to fit in the box and look like other people, and we want our bodies to look like other people. And so anytime we go off course, it's like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me is how we've been socialized. And so for conversations like yours and ours in the world to go like, nothing's wrong with you. This is just how your body's doing it. And like I wrote down the word try as you said it, because try has such a bad rap, but that is so much what we're doing. It's like, let me try acupuncture. Let me try changing my diet. Let me try a new exercise. Like, and in my Speaking Light into Abortion podcast, I feel like the message I repeated over and over and over again was like, if it didn't work, try something new. If it didn't work, try
Mhm.
something new. If it didn't work, try something new. Like, nothing's wrong with you. You just haven't found the thing that puts all the pieces together for you yet.
Yeah,
Um,
100%. I think
yeah.
that if my work in this area, clinically speaking, for the last, well, going on 13 years now, has taught me anything, it's that most of the time it's just about trying a bunch of stuff and seeing what works, because there's no, again, universally applicable solution that will work for
Yeah.
everything. And also balancing it with this idea that sometimes we try everything and we still don't necessarily get the bodily health outcomes that we're looking for. And it's that acceptance that, yeah,
Yeah.
bodies are weird and they do strange things. And sometimes they don't act the way we want. And that's directly in conflict with this message that we receive in a healthist way from diet culture and wellness culture and influencers on the internet, that if you just do this list of prescriptive things, that you will get a particular health outcome. And this leads to people feeling a lot of shame and failure because they're trying this diet or this exercise program or this set of behaviors, you know, meditating or breathing correctly or going to acupuncture or whatever the influencer is saying worked for their particular circumstance with, you know, an N of 1 in their little
Yeah.
experiment.
Yeah.
And so recognizing that your unique body is individual and will behave as such
Yeah.
really goes against this idea that we should be able to just do a set of a list of behaviors and get a particular outcome. And it just doesn't always work that way. Sometimes one thing that worked for your neighbor or your best friend or your mother or whoever you're talking to about it
Or
might not
you
work
2
for
years
you.
ago.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. And it's
Yeah.
about my long-winded way of saying not making yourself wrong for not being able to get the health outcome
Yeah.
that you're looking
Yeah.
for.
Sometimes like questions just pop into my head, and as you were just talking, like I just hear very clearly and like see the words, yes, I'm crazy. The words were like, how am I experiencing this? And even like, how am I experiencing this right now?
Yeah.
It's just this constant check-in, which kind of leads me to another question I had for you around the trying. And the question may be the answer, but where's that balance line? And not that there is one, we're just talking about it. Balance line of like trying something and sticking with it long enough that you would see the effect versus moving on to the next thing. There's that like nuanced place. And part of me wants to say, like, listen to yourself, listen to your gut, listen to your intuition, check in with spirit. Like, that's only you can decide. And then part of me is like, learning all of that is its own set of things to do. So again, I don't, obviously there's no one answer, but like, how do you personally know how and when to stick with something and when to be like, this is not working for me? I'm gonna try something else.
So it depends what you're talking about. So if you're talking about lifestyle approaches, I think that that's an area where you can really lean into your own intuition in terms of, is this serving me? Is it helping my symptoms? Is it making me feel better? Do I have, I guess, a positive relationship with this thing that I'm doing right now? Or am I using it as a way to beat myself up, which probably isn't going to be helpful? So again, highly individual. But then when we're talking about something that presents symptoms that are medically treatable,
Yeah.
I always recommend consulting with somebody who's an expert in that area. And I'm going to give my usual disclaimer before I talk about this,
Okay.
which is that it's my thought that there's no hierarchy of treatment options. And what I mean by that is that there are so many options for people. So to give it a little bit of concrete context, let's say, for example, somebody was experiencing insomnia as a result of the hormone shifts. That's something that people commonly experience when going through the transition, and it can happen for a variety of different reasons within the context of perimenopause. So if somebody finds that all of a sudden, let's say they can't sleep after they ovulate all the way until they get their period, that's just a part of their cycle when they can't sleep. Very common.
Yeah.
And something that I've personally experienced as well. So in terms of options for treating that, again, there's a huge spectrum of things that people can try. And I think that it's important not to assign a hierarchy to the options. So, for example, there is something called hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, where you're actually using pharmaceutical medications that are, hormonally based to shift the endocrine balance in your body. And that would be done through your medical doctor or a gynecologist. And then there's a whole other spectrum on the other side of things where you're looking at acupuncture or herbal medicine, for which you would see a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner or a Chinese medicine doctor like myself. Or if you want to go the functional medicine route, which will look more like supplements or dietary adjustments or something like that. And so it's all about just kind of picking something and deciding what resonates with you, and then seeking out a provider that has extensive experience in helping people with that. And they will be able to guide you through their clinical experience. So for example, for me, I tell my patients, you got to give it 3 cycles to know if it's going to be effective for you. Whereas your gynecologist might say 4 to 6 weeks, and then we'll know if this is going to be a solution or if we need to. And I'm not saying I think it's 4 to 6 weeks, but your gynecologist will give you the actual timeline. But they'll be able to give you, through their expertise, how long they think you should try it before you're going to know. Because it's true, if you go for 2 acupuncture appointments, you're probably not going to get the full results that you're looking for. And it doesn't mean that it's not going to work for you, just means that it hasn't worked yet. But where I want to bring it back to is the idea of, if you mention, let's say, to your really crunchy granola girlfriends, your witchy friends, like the company that I prefer to keep, if you mention to them, yeah, I'm having insomnia and I'm taking progesterone supplements through my gynecologist, don't let people tell you that it's wrong or that it's not natural enough. to try medications, it's totally okay to do that. And conversely, if you want to try the natural route first and you're going to your acupuncture or your TCM practitioner, and maybe your mother says, well, I just took progesterone supplements. It was easy. I went to my doctor. Why are you trying all this weirdo, cracko, wacko stuff?
Yeah.
And just know that your individual orientation toward these therapies and what you think about them is what matters, as opposed to anybody else. I don't know if I answered your question at all. I don't even remember what it is
I
at
don't
this
remember
point.
either, because I was just like, oh, yes, yes, yes. Oh, that balance of like sticking with it versus trying and stopping. And
Yes, yes,
and the
yes.
answer
Okay.
was, whatever you're trying, seek out the expertise of that particular modality or field or whatever it is, and follow their, like, if trust yourself to find someone who's an expert and follow
Yeah.
their expertise. And that's
Yeah.
really what I want to create in the full spectrum space, is like, I want to be a library of those experts that you can move through all your reproductive transformations. Like, somebody said to me, like, well, are you going to explain to me what's going on with my hormones? I'm like, nope. I might link you to an article, but like, that's that, I'm not the person for that. Like,
Yeah, you're the connector. You're the one who
yeah,
can show the path to these various things. And before we kind of veer too far off the subject, I just also want to bring it back to the lifestyle stuff, within our insomnia example, our not sleeping example, which is that there are also a lot of suggestions out there that you can apply in terms of lifestyle adjustment. So it could be adjusting your sleep hygiene, it could be meditating, it could be, playing with the lighting in your house. There's so many pieces of advice out there.
yeah,
And so what I want to say about that is that when you're trying those things, and you can try all of it at once if you want to, in addition to the work that you're
that
doing
was my
with
next question. Okay,
with
keep
whatever
going.
medical practitioner you do,
Yeah,
I think the key there is not to use it against yourself, which I think a lot of us do when we're socialized as women. And it also comes from productivity culture and the culture that we're supposed to be constantly improving ourselves and working on ourselves. That
yeah,
all goes
yeah,
into it. But a lot of people try these lifestyle things, and it usually ends up being like pretty convoluted and prescriptive and complicated in a lot of ways. And sometimes it's to a point where it's kind of impossible to maintain it and sustain it over the long term. And then, the person will unfortunately make it mean that they failed or they didn't do it right. And again, my long-winded way of saying that sometimes these are things that need extra medical treatment. Sometimes you
yeah,
do need to
right.
seek help from a practitioner as opposed to just lifestyling your way out of it, because there's this big overarching message that we hear that you should be able to heal all of your health problems with diet and lifestyle and exercise, which
Yeah.
to me is bullshit. Sometimes you need to take the drugs, sometimes you need to see an acupuncturist, sometimes you need to reach out for expertise, and it doesn't mean that you failed or that you're doing it wrong.
Totally, totally. Even as I was telling you the story earlier about, like, a year ago, I had a DNC because I had heavy bleeding. In my head, I was thinking, like, who's judging me for the reasons I had the heavy bleeding because I drank too much coffee or like watch Netflix at night? Like, I know
Yes.
it. And still, I'm like, do I even want to say this thing out loud because someone's going to have an opinion about it? And I was going to say obviously, but nothing's obvious. Like, I've overcome a lot of that, like, to be able to talk about abortion the way I have publicly and like everything I talk about. I've overcome a lot of that. But if I think back to just like, what, 15 minutes ago, there was that moment in my head where I was like, do I even want to say this out loud? Like, what are people going to think or comment? Like, you should
Mm-hmm.
try my whatever. Um,
Yeah,
so
and I think that the beauty of putting that out there is giving permission for people to sometimes just have a DNC. and
Yeah.
not need to lifestyle your way out of it.
It worked
Because
amazingly, by the way.
yeah, because using medical procedures and pharmaceutical medications, they're there for a reason and they work, and thank goodness that they exist. And it's a valid choice
Yeah.
to want to do it that way,
Yeah.
or to
Well, I
need to do it
also
that way.
remember, we're like off on a little tangent, but it's fun. I had it done last January, and like from my very little knowledge about traditional Chinese medicine and the cycle of the body, I was like, this is a terrible time to do this. Like, in like seasonally to do this midwinter and like go in and scrape. And I remember like, am I making it worse? Am I making it better? Just because I'd heard all these little snippets from little places and like, and I just was like, you know what? This feels right. I'm going to do it. And I did, and it totally worked. But,
well, before you go on, I just want to
yeah,
interrupt you with something that might be useful, because we
yeah,
do hear things like that. We have access to infinite amounts of expertise on the internet where people can just throw out these pieces of information. And that can affect your thought pattern about your own body for the rest of your life if you don't critically think about it. And what I want to offer in terms of critical thinking when it comes to thermodynamics and the body and health is that, a lot of these Chinese medicine recommendations are coming from a system of medicine that is thousands of years old. And it's important to respect how old and amazing and incredible and deep and rich the medicine is. At the same time, we have to understand that we're applying it in a modern context.
yeah.
So yeah, if you lived in 1700, BC China, yeah, you probably needed to be really concerned about it being the middle of winter and
Right. But like, I
preserving your
have a warm
stores.
house. I have enough food. I have
We
like,
have climate control. We're not in the same context at all. And so it
yeah.
becomes
Oh, I
more
love that.
energetic than literal at this point in
Yes.
time, especially if we're looking at, again, the individual person's body. If they're showing signs of feeling cold all the time and their body, tactily feels cold, or they're experiencing cold sensations, yes, we probably need to be more careful and more aware of their seasonal relationship to things. But the majority of folks going through perimenopause have a heat problem. So maybe we don't need to worry so much about
Yeah.
the cold winter.
Oh
Maybe
gosh,
we can
that's
stretch
so
things a little bit more.
interesting.
Yeah, so context is everything. So
Yeah.
it's this balance between respecting and, taking into account thousands of years of knowledge, but also knowing that we're applying it in this modern context where we have heat and a consistent source of food and
Yeah.
protection from the elements.
Right. Oh, that's so good. It's so good. Um, one question I wanted to, and like we could talk forever. After
I'll
I ask
come
you this
back. It's
question,
all good.
I want to go more into perimenopause, but my question is, what do you say to the people who, because I hear this, I've heard this, we all hear this a lot, I think. Well, I don't want to try too many things at one time because I won't know what's working. And that is never my approach. I'm pretty much like throw everything at it and like figure out by elimination. Well, if you have to, right? But that's a real concern for a lot of people. They're like, I don't want to try acupuncture and hormone replacement therapy, or I don't want to try lifestyle changes and acupuncture because I won't know what was working. Like, I think that's like a mentality that a lot of us have. So,
Yeah.
what do you say to that?
Yeah, very, very valid question. And one that I think that we can work towards answering. But the big secret that I'm about to reveal to you right now is
So
that we
ready.
never really know anything when it comes to human bodies. So that's one thing that I talk about a lot with my folks who are struggling with infertility. I'm a practitioner who works with a lot of people who are at the same time as seeing me, they're also using Western medicine. So pharmaceuticals, surgical procedures, whatever.
Yeah.
So for example, I think about people with severe grade 3-4 endometriosis who are on disability, can't go to work because they're constantly in pain, they're not sleeping, they're not eating, like their life is just about pain. And so they finally, and I'm in Canada, so our healthcare system is amazing in a lot of ways, but also you're probably waiting 2 or 3 years for the surgery that you need because of our healthcare system.
I
And
remind
also
myself
because,
this all the time.
yeah,
Whenever I get
well,
healthcare, I'm like, okay, there's so many blessings and curses in both systems.
absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, there's also, patriarchy in where we just don't believe women when they tell us that they're in pain, and B, put research dollars into finding solutions that are actually going to help women with their pain. So that's all in the mix as well. But I'm thinking particularly about the patients who do finally get to have their surgery. And then when you have your ovaries removed, you're put into surgically induced menopause. You're basically in menopause overnight. So you're getting all of the symptoms that come with that, or that will come with that for your particular body and unique constitution. And I find that the people who have the greatest success are usually people who use a combination of a couple of different things to reach their goal, because different systems of medicine are going to have different advantages. And so it's really, in my opinion, a good approach to just kind of trying a bunch of stuff and seeing what works. Because honestly, we're really never going to have confirmation in terms of what works anyway.
Yeah, and like, exactly. We're humans in this wildly complex social world. So even if you were like, I am only going to do hormone replacement therapy, you're never only doing anything, because is just knowing you're like, is there placebo happening? Is there like finally feeling supported and heard that's shifting, that like there's, I just love that. Like it's,
Or is it just the
you never
relief that
know.
you're
Never
finally
know.
trying something and you don't have to wait
Yeah.
there's so much that we
Yeah.
don't have the technology or the language to explain about how human bodies work.
Yeah.
So my short answer to your question, after I've just given a very long answer, is that it's really not a good question to be asking.
So,
How will
so
I
true.
know? Like,
I
how
agree.
will I know what works?
Yeah.
Who cares? If
Yeah.
you feel better, who cares what worked? If
Exactly.
you feel good, keep doing what you're doing. And it's guaranteed that at some point it's going to stop working in the same way, and you're going to have to try something else, because again, that's how human bodies work. So I think a better question is, what can I try? What do I feel up for? What am I interested in?
Yeah. 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 So good. Okay. Can we spend like 10 minutes talking about anything you want to share? Obviously, people should go listen to your podcast and follow your work, but anything you want people to know? Like maybe we need a whole nother conversation about perimenopause. Like, what do we not know that would be useful to know? What are the things you find yourself saying over and over and over again that you haven't said already? Because a lot of them you've already said.
So I think that just educating yourself on a basic 101 of what could happen is super useful to people. I'm a huge, huge advocate for body literacy, which we
Mm,
don't really receive as people with uteruses and ovaries and the
yeah.
hormone picture that goes with it. What we learn, let's say, for example, in high school sex ed, is don't have sex or you'll get pregnant, and this is how a baby is made. And that's pretty much all we learn. I think for the upcoming generations, that's changing a lot. Thank goodness. They're
Yeah.
really doing a lot better at educating people with uteruses on how their bodies work. But just recognizing that there's a huge knowledge gap there for most people. And so even if they do start to see signs, they might not consider perimenopause as a potential cause for that. So, yes, my podcast is a good resource. I do a lot of work on just educating, what the various symptoms could be, how it happens, what the hormones are, what their rules are. But I'm sure you could also just, have a conversation with your gynecologist,
Mm-hmm.
see if there's YouTube videos. You can do an internet search. and basically just educating yourself on what are the things that can kind of start to happen, because our expectation of perimenopause and menopause, and just to kind of briefly highlight, a lot of people, when they think about what they call menopause, they're actually talking about perimenopause, which is menopause
That's what I'm
happens.
starting to figure out.
Yes, yes. Menopause itself happens at a moment in time, a moment in time where basically you haven't had a period for a year, for 12 months consecutively, and then you're officially in menopause because you've stopped bleeding. But the time that's kind of Hollywood glamorized, like, you know, the memes about erupting in flames or losing your mind or getting super emotional, all of those like funny but not funny things that we see in the internet, because that's really the only exposure we have to this concept. That's actually perimenopause. That's the time that you're spending as your hormones shift into not having a period anymore. And that's the time when you're going to get hot flashes and insomnia and mood swings and vaginal dryness and all the fun things that we talk about, libido changes, lengthening or shortening, or changes in your cycle, heaviness of your bleeding, all of these fun things happen. That's actually perimenopause. So educating yourself on what perimenopause is so you can start to see it happening, because it's not this big bang that all of a sudden happens. It's usually a gradual onset that you experience. And so if you can recognize these things that are happening early, then the earlier you can start to advocate for yourself to get the care that you need. So it could be, again, going to your medical doctor and just having some hormonal blood work done. It could be consulting, your naturopathic doctor or your functional medicine practitioner or your TCM practitioner, your Chinese medicine doctor, whoever you like to go to, because again, it's really individual and preference based. And you can start to kind of work on these things as they come up, not with the expectation that they're not going to happen or that it's not going to get bad, but at least you can feel like you have, a foot in the door, that you're kind of not just being dragged through the process, but you're more along for the ride, and that you have some agency in the whole thing. That would be my piece of advice.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
Well, it's not that personal. I made it sound like I was gonna like divulge something, but I do that all over the internet.
I'm an open book. It's fine. It's fine. I just put out a podcast episode about vaginal dryness in my sex life last week.
I know. I was like, wow, I'm glad I don't have that one yet. Vaginal dryness is definitely not a problem over here. But wow, I'm not gonna like that one if it comes.
Well, and it might not for you. But
one time a bunch of girlfriends dropped off you know what I think it was? Sweetest gesture ever. It was after my abortion, I think, and a bunch of girlfriends dropped off like a care package, and in it was KY jelly. And I remember laughing and being like, what am I gonna, like, looking at my husband and be like, we don't need this. Like, wrong person. But it was, anyway, very sweet. For the last couple of years, so I turned 44 in March, and for the last couple of years, I started increased blaming. This is what we do. We like to figure out what caused it. But just to use basic language, blaming increased anxiety on the pandemic makes perfect sense. Like, I felt like I never struggled with anxiety until the pandemic. And then it was like, holy shit, this is what people are talking about. And it hasn't really gone away. And it's not about like, I'm not like afraid I'm gonna die from COVID, or it's not like a pandemic specific, but just general increased anxiety. And for years I've been like, yeah, my anxiety started with the pandemic. And then just recently, somewhere I heard that increased anxiety is a common thing that happens in perimenopause. And I was like, maybe that's related. Maybe it wasn't just about the pandemic. It's just like a colliding of things happening at the same time for me. So I'll stop talking. Tell me what your thoughts are about increased anxiety during perimenopause.
Yeah. So I think mental health stuff, I mean, again, everything in the human body is complex and there's a lot that we don't know, but especially mental health stuff, and especially when we're people that are socialized as women,
Yeah.
I think that it's important to acknowledge that even if there is a physical basis in the emotional symptoms that you are experiencing, it doesn't invalidate the reason for why they're happening. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So, yes, it could be a change in physiology that's kind of the spark or the ignition to this increase in anxiety for you. Or I guess I would say maybe even a susceptibility to being more anxious. But it could be that the pandemic is legitimately making you anxious. And, as a collective population that's in existence right now, I would say that we're all a little bit deficient in resilience, and it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that there are medical tests that can determine if something's going on, because yes, it can be hormones. It could also be that you have low iron. It could be a lot of different things. Like having anemia can make people super fucking anxious.
That is so interesting because that's how I landed with the DNC, because I don't know. Shoot, I can't think of the what's the like kind of baseline iron number? Not the hemoglobin, like the
Ferritin?
stores. Yes.
Ferritin?
Yes, was at like a 6, and I was like so depleted. And it was just puzzle piecing, like, and realizing I've been bleeding so heavy for so long and just been like, oh, it's just what my body does, just what my body does. But like after enough time, it was completely depleting me. So anyway,
Yeah.
that
And
was how
the
I
thing about
landed.
iron, just to say, the thing about iron is that the less you have, the heavier your bleeding will be.
Yeah.
So the more iron you lose, the more blood you lose. It's a pretty crazy cycle.
So you just added another layer to the puzzle of my anxiety, which is like it was right around, because I had the procedure, in the smack dab in the middle of the pandemic, like to January 2021. So it was like, I guess, depending on how you define smack dab in the middle, because what is it?
What
But
is it?
that just adds a whole nother layer. Like on top of the pandemic and my age, I also really had massively depleted iron, and it has improved dramatically since the procedure. And now when I can tell in my body, so I'll just increase supplements
Yeah.
or dark leafy greens or meats or whatever.
Yeah.
I can mostly regulate it now, but I love that you just said that, because it just was like, see how many pieces to the puzzle there are. And you just hear
Yeah.
one little thing, you're like, oh, that could have been a factor too.
Well, and that's the thing about it, is just trying stuff and seeing what works. I mean, like maybe some massive doses of iron or some iron infusions might be helpful for you, or maybe it'll just make you feel better physically, but your nervous system is now, adapted to be more anxious. And so
Totally.
maybe you need to work on your nervous system too. Or maybe it is hormones. It's probably everything, because all of this stuff tends to happen all at the same time in this beautiful transition that we call perimenopause. So who knows what the catalyst is? We'll probably never know.
Right.
But we do know that all of these things can probably be addressed to significantly improve the quality of life.
I am writing down these words. I will probably recycle them, but writing them down seals it in for me. Like, I want a t-shirt that says it's probably everything. It's like, we just need to like plaster that everywhere. It's probably everything.
Well,
Like,
that's the thing
why is
about the
this
medicine that
happening? It's probably everything.
yeah, well, that's the thing about practicing and looking at the body through a holistic lens, is that, Western medicine, while incredible and thank goodness it exists, it tends to be fairly reductive and compartmentalizes things. You have specialists that are just focused on very specific areas of the body. And so when you're focusing on just the hormones, you miss out on the opportunity to look at the other things that might either be exacerbated by it or contributing to it, or maybe the catalyst to begin with.
This has been so good and so fun. Okay, perimenopology.
Perimenopology.
I will link to everything. I'll link to you.
Thank you.
But where else can people find you? Are you Michelle Kapler on Instagram or something else?
I am. Yeah, no, I'm Michelle Kapler on Instagram.
Okay.
So there's that. And then if you want to read more about clinical services and things like that, unfortunately, I can only help people who live in the province of Ontario, Canada. But if you do live in the province of Ontario, Canada, I'm happy to help you in person or virtually. And all of that info can be found on my website, michellekapler.com. And I'm mostly on Instagram and then through the podcast. And I also have another, speaking of having multiple podcasts, I have another podcast also called the Infertility Stress Podcast. So if anybody's in that stage where fertility is an issue, there's lots of good, juicy, feminist, body literacy, thought work kind of episodes there as well.
So good. So logistically, I have a question for you. When I realized I wanted to start recording these conversations as like building my library for the full spectrum space, I decided to drop the abortion podcast down to bi-weekly instead of weekly. Do you do yours on any kind of regular schedule?
Well, I'm doing perimenopology regularly now because I've got a collection of about 60 episodes in infertility. So I'll do one every now and again, but I'd say that the majority of my body of work is kind of in that 60 plus episodes now. So people can get a lot from just going and listening to all of those. And then if you want to take it deeper, then we can work together. That's an option too.
I went to edit or to upload my podcast last night for today's episode, and it had like the most number of views, like downloads, like weekly downloads that it's, I think, ever had. And I was like, isn't that interesting? I just started bi-weekly episodes and it didn't like, because you get these stories in your head, like if I stop doing a weekly podcast, no one will listen anymore. Like, oh my God. Thank you for that proof.
Yeah, no, I also have another podcast because I'm a former over drinker, and I have also a podcast where I talked about my journey of going from somebody who drinks a bottle of wine every night to a person who has maybe one glass or two glasses a year. So that, and that's like, I haven't put out an episode on that podcast for a good year and a half now, and it still gets downloads all the time.
I love it. That's so good. So fun. I have done, this is my third podcast, but I took the others down and now I'm like, oh, should have looked those up. Oh, well.
There's no right answer. That's the big theme of today. There's no right answer. It doesn't matter. It could be everything. It could be nothing. It's fine.
It's probably everything, or it might be nothing. So good. Okay, well, I am going to add you and your work to my resource library in the full spectrum space around, okay, I'll have to add you around infertility, perimenopause, and whatever other lovelies I decide to categorize you in. But thank you so much. This is amazing.
Of course.
Let's keep getting to know each other.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
So fun. Bye.
Bye.